Hello everyone, my name is Pallavi Kulkarni and today I'm going to talk about web services, more specifically SOAP and RESTful, as these are the two most widely used web services. So what is a web service? To quote Wikipedia, web service is a service offered by an electronic device to another electronic device over internet. Essentially that means service offered by an application to another application over internet. So the application that offers service is called as a web service provider, and the application that consumes the service is called as a requester or consumer or client. These terms are used interchangeably. So here are some of the features web services provide. The first one is interoperable, meaning your web service provider and web service client are independent of language and platform they are running on. So the web service provider written in, say, Java language running on a Linux platform can communicate with the client written in .NET running on a Windows platform. The second point is extensible. So the web service, you can easily add any new functionality without affecting the original functionalities. Third feature is loosely coupled. So the state of service provider is independent of the state of web service client. So both of them do not need to know each other's internals. So let's see the types of web services. So the first one is SOAP, which stands for Simple Object Access Protocol. The second one is REST, which stands for Representational State Transfer. We'll see both of them in detail. So this is the diagram that explains SOAP-based web service. Here, the web service provider has to publish itself on the web service directory, which say UDDI, which stands for Universal Description Discovery Language Integration. And the web service client will look up for this web service on the directory, and it will acquire the WSDL file and starts communicating with the provider. So in SOAP, the data format supported is XML. So you can have the data in exchange in XML. We'll see what the WSDL file is shortly. So the key component of SOAP web services is WSDL, which is an XML file with a .wsdl extension. And you specify all the data types, the way the messages are constructed, everything in this WSDL file. It's a formal contract between the web service provider and the client. So that means once you establish the WSDL file, you can independently develop provider and client. You need not wait for the provider to be up. So let's see, this is the basic structure of WSDL document. As you can see here, we have 5 main elements: types, message, port type, binding, and service. So the type will define the messages that will be sent, and the message element will make use of the types to construct these messages. The port type will specify the operations, say for example, creating input response or sending back the response. The binding element will describe how the messages are binded. So the most commonly used binding type is document literal, and the web service engine will use this binding type to validate the entire SOAP message. And last but not the least, service element. Here is where you define your URL for the web service, which will be used by the outside world for accessing the service. So this is a code snippet from IBM docs. As you can see here, they have defined create new add functionality in this request. So what are the steps developing SOAP web services? So you need to write service provider and the consumer. The important aspect here is defining the WSDL file. In WSDL document, you will list out all the types, all the functionalities that you will be providing in your service, and publish this on the directory, as we have seen in the previous diagram. Once you have the WSDL file, you can generate the stubs from these WSDL files. There are a lot of plugins available. One of them is CodeGen, which can take this visual document and convert it into say Java documents, Java classes. Then the next step is developing the interface and implementation classes. So for example, if you're creating a customer or you're getting the customer, you write down all these implementation classes, and the final step is publishing the endpoint. So same goes with the consumer. First you obtain the WSDL file, and based on the WSDL you generate the stubs, and then finally you create the client. So there are two approaches which we can use for developing SOAP web services. The first one is top-down and second one is bottom-up. Top-down is also called as contract first. Here we have to define the WSDL contract, the document first. That's why, as the name suggests, contract first, and then follow the rest of the steps. In bottom-up, you already have the legacy system, and based on the legacy system code, you generate the WSDL file. It's a bit trickier compared to the first one because you don't want to break the functionalities. And finally, you just publish the services. So now we'll see RESTful web services. RESTful web services are much easier to implement compared to SOAP, as you don't need to write down the WSDL file, which involves a bit of learning curve. You need XML, XSSD, and all that. In REST, all you need is HTTP. So it makes full use of HTTP methods. As we have seen, it makes CRUD operations easy with those respective HTTP methods. All you have to do here is identify the resource, map it to the URI, and then follow along with the HTTP methods. So the key difference between SOAP and RESTful web services is RESTful supports multiple data formats. So you can use XML, JSON, plain text, but in SOAP you have to use XML. So this is a code snippet from Oracle JAX-RS docs. JAX-RS is the API provided by Oracle for developing RESTful web services, and JAX-WS is the one provided for developing SOAP. So let's see how this works. So this is an example for creating customer using RESTful web services. Here we are identifying the resource, which is a customer in this case, and we are mapping this resource to the URI. You can see the add path annotation /customer. We are mapping this customer class with the /customer annotation. And now we have this create customer method, which is accepting a customer input and providing a response back. As you see, it's a post request, so we are mapping it with the add post annotation, and there is a add consumes annotation used to indicate what kind of input the method is accepting. So this one is supporting XML and JSON. So this is basically to tell the web service engine what kind of request will be coming in. And the next one is the get customer method. Here we are using add produces annotation, which tells what kind of response will go back to the customer or the client. So the web service engine will compile and assemble the response based on these annotations. So let's see the response back here. When we access get customer, the response is 200 if it finds the customer with the ID, and this is the XML response we are getting back. So finally, I would like to lay out some differences between SOAP and RESTful. The first and important one is the data format supported by each. SOAP supports XML and RESTful will support XML, JSON, and HTML. Another important difference between the two is bandwidth consumption. So SOAP consumes more bandwidth because the SOAP envelope contains SOAP header and SOAP body, and it's more verbose compared to RESTful. So when you have bandwidth constraints, you can use REST. So in mobile application development, RESTful is much helpful as it consumes less bandwidth. Another important difference is SOAP protocol. As SOAP messages can use any of the protocols, TCP, FTP, SMTP, while the RESTful is heavily dependent on HTTP because it makes use of all the HTTP methods for the communication. And finally, Oracle has provided JAX WS API for developing SOAP web services and JAX RS for RESTful web services. So if you want to dig deeper, these are some additional resources which you might find helpful. And that's it. Thank you all for your time.